Angela Wright was a renowned scientist and had spent many years working hard in her field. She had grown up in a small neighborhood where few people believed that a young black girl could become anything extraordinary. But Angela had a gift. She was endlessly curious and had a hunger for knowledge. As a child, she would take apart clocks and radios just to see how they worked. Her parents, though not wealthy, always encouraged her to dream big and never let anyone tell her what she could or couldn't do. In school, Angela excelled in science and math, but it wasn't always easy for her. She faced challenges not just because of the difficulty of the subjects, but also because many people doubted her abilities. Some teachers thought she wouldn't make it far, and some classmates teased her, saying things like, "Science isn't for people like you." But Angela's spirit was strong. She carried the lessons her parents taught her. Don't let other people's small minds block your big dreams. Through determination, she earned scholarships to prestigious universities. She became one of the few black women in the world of medical research, often being the only person of color in rooms filled with professors and researchers. Despite the loneliness that came with being in such spaces, Angela thrived. Over the years, she made significant contributions to science, eventually leading a research team that developed a groundbreaking vaccine for a rare disease that had saved countless lives. One bright morning, Angela packed her bags to attend an international science conference, where she was invited as the keynote speaker. This was no small event. Scientists and researchers from all over the world would gather to discuss the future of medical advancements. Angela had spent weeks preparing her presentation, and she was ready to share her work with the world. She arrived at the airport, dressed in a simple but professional outfit. Angela always tried to remain humble, never flaunting her success. But today was special. As she reached the check-in counter, she smiled at the airline agent. "Good morning," she said warmly as she handed over her ID and ticket. The agent glanced at her ID, but didn't smile back. Her expression was stiff. After typing on her computer for a moment, she said, "Wait here for a second." Angela nodded but felt a twinge of unease. It wasn't unusual for her to notice a certain coldness from strangers at times, but she always tried to shrug it off. She watched as the agent whispered something to a colleague, who gave Angela a quick, suspicious glance. "Is there a problem?" Angela asked politely. "No problem, just a security check," the agent replied curtly. Soon after, two airport security guards approached Angela and stood on either side of her. "Ma'am, we'll need to ask you to step aside for additional screening," one of them said. Angela felt a knot form in her stomach. She had traveled countless times before, but something about the tone in the guard's voice unsettled her. "Of course," she replied, keeping her voice calm. The guards led her to a private screening area, away from the other passengers. As Angela followed them, she could feel the curious eyes of people in the waiting area, and she heard a few murmurs. Some passengers exchanged whispers as they watched her walk away. "Did you see that?" one woman whispered to her companion. "Yeah, they're probably checking her for something." "You know how it is," the other person responded. Angela heard the remarks and clenched her jaw. She had experienced these kinds of looks and comments before, the kind that assumed the worst about her without knowing anything about who she was. Inside the private screening room, the guards asked Angela to place her belongings on a table. They went through her bag slowly, inspecting everything from her laptop to her toiletries. Angela stood still, keeping her hands at her sides, determined not to show how uncomfortable she felt. "Ma'am, we need to see some identification," one of the guards said. Angela handed over her passport and boarding pass. The guards inspected them closely, flipping through the pages of her passport as if they expected to find something suspicious. "Is there a reason I'm being singled out?" Angela asked calmly. "It's just a routine security check," the guard said, not meeting her eyes. Angela knew that wasn't entirely true. She had been through random checks far too often to believe it was only about security. As the guards continued their inspection, Angela thought about the presentation she was supposed to give at the conference. She had spent months preparing for it, and the thought of being delayed or missing her flight made her heart race. After several minutes of silence, one of the guards suddenly paused, looking down at Angela's ID. His eyes widened slightly as he read the name, Angela Wright. He stared at it for a moment, then glanced up at her. "Wait a second. Are you the doctor? Angela Wright?" The guard asked, his tone shifting from suspicion to surprise. "Yes, I am," Angela replied cautiously, unsure of what had caused the sudden change in his demeanor. The guard exchanged glances with his colleague. "You mean the Angela Wright who developed the vaccine for NDX disease?" "That's me," Angela said quietly, still holding on to her composure. The two guards stared at her in disbelief. One of them quickly whispered to the other, "I didn't know she was traveling today." The mood in the room changed instantly. The guards, who had been cold and distant just moments ago, suddenly became apologetic. "We are so sorry for the inconvenience, Doctor. Right?" one of them said quickly. "We had no idea. Please forgive the misunderstanding." Angela gave a small nod, though inside she felt a mix of frustration and sadness. It was clear that their behavior toward her changed only because they had realized who she was. "Thank you," she said, taking her belongings from the table and placing them back in her bag. "I'd like to get to my gate now." "Of course, we'll escort you personally," one of the guards offered eagerly, trying to make amends for their earlier treatment. Angela declined politely. "That won't be necessary. Just let me through, please." As she left the screening room, Angela noticed the difference in the way people at the gate were looking at her. The whispers had turned into murmurs of recognition. Some passengers nudged each other and pointed in her direction. "That's Dr. Angela Wright. She's the one who developed the NDX vaccine," someone said in awe. Angela walked calmly to her seat in the waiting area, keeping her head held high. The flight attendants greeted her warmly when it was time to board. "Welcome aboard, Doctor." "Right. We're honored to have you with us today," one of them said with a bright smile. Angela gave them a polite nod, though the earlier events still weighed on her heart. As she took her seat on the plane, she thought about how quickly people's attitudes had shifted when they learned who she was. It was a reminder of how often people judge others based on appearances rather than character. During the flight, Angela reflected on the experience. She knew that not everyone would get the chance to prove their worth, and that troubled her. What if she hadn't been recognized? Would they have treated her with the same respect? When the plane landed, Angela felt a renewed sense of purpose. She knew her work wasn't just about science. It was about changing the way people see one another. She resolved to use her platform to advocate for equality and fairness, both in science and in everyday life. Angela's story didn't end there. She continued to inspire others with her work, not just through her research, but through her advocacy. She spoke at conferences, schools, and community events, encouraging people to look beyond appearances and see the potential in everyone. Over time, Angela became a symbol of resilience and excellence. She showed the world that success isn't determined by how you look, but by the strength of your mind and heart. And in doing so, she made a lasting impact, not only in science, but in the way people treated one another.